Dobry wieczór. Bardzo się cieszę, że mogę dzisiaj być z Państwem tutaj w Warszawie. And I would like to start with a slight correction of the title of my paper. So when we agreed the title a couple of weeks ago, or even 2 months ago, it looked still like an ongoing conflict, what is today happening in Ukraine, but I think it is much more proper today to speak about a war, and even if it's not an announced war, what we today see in Ukraine is a full-fledged war with both an internal and external dimension. So I would put my title, Repercussions of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the public perception of the Ukrainian war in Lithuania and Belarus. And I speak about this as a person teaching in a Belarusian university in Lithuanian exile, and I do go on a regular basis to Minsk, and did so last weekend. And just to start, with a more tiny anecdote. So Alexander Lukashenko organized a World Cup, as you know, in his famous sport, ice hockey. And I think the dates of this, the time frame of this World Cup actually is quite meaningful. And it says something about the link between past and future. So there was no doubt that the World Cup should start on May the 9th, the day of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. And there is no irony actually behind that. There is a plan to finish the hockey World Championship on the 25th of May of this year. The most meaningful date in regard to the topic I want to address today. So the date of the planned referendum, and also the future of Ukraine, I would say, in a very close perspective. So, facing Ukraine from a Lithuanian perspective, actually being funded by a German academic exchange. I maybe should add this, that I'm in charge of German studies in Vilnius, and did decide not to go into this very tricky link between Polish, Lithuanian, Jewish, German relations in regard to World War II and also World War II and also the Holocaust. So that's not part of my research, which I do today, but I thought coming to Vilnius, to Warsaw, it would be good to try to bring together what is going on in the region, and how does it, my question is basically, how does it relate to social memory in those two societies? So let me go back to the very beginning of Lithuania's EU presidency in July 2013. A former fountain at the Lithuanian parliament, as you know in Polish, Sejm, comes from Lithuanian, yes. Seimas was redesigned by a Lithuanian artist. On each side of this pyramid, a map projected the historical borders of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania onto today's political borders. So this is 15th, 16th century Lithuania, and it's very important that it reaches from the Baltics to the Black Sea. And this was easily read in public articles and comments as a political statement of the Lithuanian government, trying to point out an imagined historical continuity between the former multi-ethnic state of the Grand Duchy and today's nation-state of the Republic of Lithuania. And there were, of course, also some critical comments about the involved notion of gigantomania, which were published especially on the internet back in July 2013, but there was nothing changed. So this pyramid and this artistic way of dealing with the past and projecting the past onto the present is still actually there. So if you come to Vilnius, you should visit Gedimino Square and Prospect and visit Seimas, and you will still find it there. And it's again spring, so it will be nice. And in the course of the Lithuanian EU presidency, it became quite clear that the plan to make the Eastern Partnership a major issue on the European agenda worked out, but not in the way as Lithuanian policymaker intended. So Belarus dropped out of this process called Eastern Partnership a long time ago, and its authoritarian leader, Alexander Lukashenko, did not plan to rejoin the club. And the Ukrainian president, as you all know, Viktor Yanukovych, decided after a long zigzag course between strong Russian pressure and a weak EU incentives not to sign the association treaty with the European Union. Therefore, the summit of the Eastern Partnership in early December 2013 became a quite paradox event. On the one hand, it showed the full failure of the European policies towards its eastern neighbors. Full failure, actually. On the other hand, the historical link between Lithuania and Ukraine, as you see in the map above, was established, and it was quite visible at this event, with a lot of actors actually from the Ukraine visiting the civil society summit and also the European summit itself. And this was also partly because all these events took place in a specially restored palace of the Grand Dukes, actually, which was restored from the scratch, actually, a building which was torn down by a Russian Tsarist authority as ruins already in early 19th century, was totally like reconstructed, but basically from the scratch. And when then in the course of December, the protest on Maidan and Kiev became mass events. Both Belarusian and Lithuanian society started to follow tightly the events. Because Ukraine is a neighboring country, but even more because the way how Russia reshaped its foreign policy in what until recently was called near abroad would affect also Belarus and Lithuania. The more intensive the protests became, the more they were present in the semi-public spaces in both countries. People would follow privately the Ukrainian private Espresso TV channel, and once in February violence spread on the Maidan, people in Belarus and Lithuania would not stop actually following. So I can tell from my university that basically in February there was hardly any work done because people were basically watching Maidan from the morning till late and also during the night. So it was basically it was an event which we were part of, like observing it from not so far away actually. And the day after first protesters were shot in February, immediately after the day after, Lithuania announced a day of national mourning. And since the following Russian annexation of Crimea in public discourses in Lithuania, there would be no more relevant issue than the question how to geopolitically tackle Russia in the region. Radio stations, newspapers, TV channels, public discussions, even the Lithuanian presidential elections taking place this Sunday are overshadowed by the ongoing war in Ukraine, ironically with the most pro-Russian candidate being the Polish minority representative. To what extent this active public perception of what is going on 500 kilometers southwards is related to memory? This is the question I ask myself. Isn't it in the first place a political issue because the worsening relations between EU and Russia will have an impact on both Lithuania's strategic position and its economy? Just to give an example, the most recent price for Russian natural gas paid by Ukraine and the one being charged from Lithuania are the most expensive among all European gas rates dictated by Gazprom and other Russian state companies. On the other hand, the awareness for the contrast between the Russian methods of transnational media wars, logistical support of irredenta partisanship, as I would call it, and the cynical official line of foreign policy derives not just from the fear of higher bills for heating during the next winter. So actually the gas price and the bills to be paid by pensioners in like Soviet housing blocks in Vilnius is really a relevant issue. And if you would switch on radio in the morning, then there would be like one discussion after another, and it would be all coming together actually. Foreign policy, the gas price, what is going on in Kiev, and how the European Union reacts, or why the reaction is so clear, and also the role of Germany is part of the discussion there. what's going on triggers some of the most relevant layers of both individual and societal or social memory codified during both in the post-World War II and post-91 period. On an individual layer, in my assumption, many Lithuanian citizens watch the Ukrainian events as a storyboard for something what could easily happen also in the Baltics, because it reminds them of the Soviet occupation of Lithuania. Especially the narrative of the Euromaidan reminded the Lithuanian society of its own victims. The fight between non-armed civilians protesting against state-run evil and armed troops was perceived as a reference to January of 1991, when more than a dozen of Lithuanians died at the Vilnius TV tower. But even deeper layers of memory were triggered in Lithuania by the TV pictures from Kiev, channeled via the internet. Some referred publicly to 1939 and 1940, when Lithuania, after 20 years of independence, was incorporated into the Soviet Union for the first time. Some commentators are still today underlining that it is again 2 decades after independence that a Russian threat shows up, and for others the traumatic events of the post-war years, when a civil war-like scenario of nationalist partisans in the forest fight against Soviet Smersh units became actively recalled into social memory today. On the other hand, for me, it was really surprising that the high relevance of the membership in both European Union and NATO had little input onto the perception of the situation in the region. So before the EU presidency, Dalia Grybauskaitė, the president, and also former EU commissar, she would actually still in May 2013, she would had in front of her palace, she would had 2 Lithuanian flags actually. So every day they would put two new Lithuanian flags in front of the palace. And today we see 1 Lithuanian, 1 European Union flag and 1 NATO flag in front of the same palace. The Green Bridge, the major site of Soviet heritage, because it is a Stalinist project representing Soviet youth, soldiers, workers and peasants. The Green Bridge is one of the places you would usually have a discussion about Soviet heritage. Should we leave it? Should we destroy it? And it is a source of reoccurring public debate. And it was it was the first-hand reaction to put, you see here Soviet workers on these photographies, and it was very important to put the pogon in Polish, paronia in Belarusian, I don't know in English, so the herb of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. In such a way it was put up onto the bridge that the Soviet workers had actually to watch it the whole day long and also during the night. And in a similar manner, the Soviet soldiers on the other end of the bridge now face on an everyday basis NATO flag. That's it's of course very symbolical, but it's in a very central place of Vilnius and a very, very lively spot. On many occasions, some of the fears linked to historical experiences and the way how they are commemorized in Lithuanian public are so strong that the Russian annexation of Crimea and the ongoing war are perceived as a real existing option also for the Baltics. And this is regardless NATO membership actually. And it's also regardless how many F-16 are in the region and how many tanks in Kaliningrad. Newspapers give advice how to prepare for a possible war. Politicians discuss the threat of Russian tanks near the Lithuanian border in the Kaliningrad region, and then private people tell about their experiences under Stalinist rule. To give a very brief account now of my analysis of what I see is going on today in Lithuania, I would just address 2 issues here. On the one hand, the ongoing Ukrainian war fits the narrative of the newly independent Lithuanian state quite well. And at the core there is an argument which is created against Russian oppression as a result of the Lithuanian people's resistance. So to have the Russian threat actually being updated actually fits very much the self-imagination of Lithuanian society. Interestingly, the 2 phases of the Kiev protest, like first civil peaceful mass protests at the Euromaidan, starting in December 2013, and the violence which broke out in February 2014 do both fit to the Lithuanian official state narrative. On the one hand, it consists of the national resistance Renaissance movement, resistance. So what is called in Lithuanian atgimimas, Renaissance. What started in mid-80s actually and became more mass movement during the second half of the 1980s, and was at the core of 1990 and 1991 sovereignty and independence, which was so powerful precisely because it was a peaceful mass movement, and also it was linked to the long-term occupation of public spaces. So you would have in the same space where you have today the pyramid in front of Seimas, you would have still in 1993 blockades organized by Lithuanians, because there were still Russian troops in Lithuania then. And oh, then I have to face also some of the Belarusian case actually. To make it short, for Lithuania, I think there are two things coming together. If we speak about the question how social or private or communal memory is transferred into something we could call institutional or public memory, then we are facing now a period in Lithuania where, on the one hand, those who did resist after the end of World War II, they pass away. Like it's similar, like we have this in Holocaust memory, that this argument about the Holocaust survivor who's not available anymore for oral history. You have something similar also for those who fight it in the woods, and the link to this is the question how this is transferred to the official narratives or to more institutionalized forms. And actually this happened in Lithuania, and it is part of the very official and very standardized, very state-run narrative, I assume, in a similar way as this happens in Latvia. And something else I face more in my work with students is that at the same time you have to update both World War II and also what happened in 1990, 1991 for those who were born afterwards. So today at Gemimas, this whole Renaissance movement and the protest against Russians or Soviet occupation for youngsters who were born after 1991 is to be updated, or is not so meaningful as it was for people who were raised still in Cold War. Now, to come to an end also, and to address at least some of the Belarusian society, I would argue that of course everybody from around, and this is not true only for Belarus but also even for Russia itself, that it's, of course, people are not watching Kiev because they want to address some memory issues. They are thinking basically about the future of their own society. So what is going on in Kiev, of course, is not about the past of what happened in, I don't know, at the TV tower in Vilnius in 1991. It is much more about what will happen in Minsk in 2 years or in 3 years. Even if this link is not very clear, and of course it's not highly probable that something like Euromaidan would happen in Belarus. It will not happen in such a way, but people follow the events precisely because they know that what has happened for them, what is going on in Kiev, is about the future of the region, not about the past. And yeah, so if we are lacking time, then I have a problem here now, really developing my argument. Then maybe I will just do it in a different way. telling that of course Belarus is totally different from Lithuania, and the way how memory is put in public space, in particular by the state as the main actor, is working in a very different way. And I was really surprised to what extent what is going on in Ukraine actually divides today Belarusian society, where you don't have this strong contradiction between Russians on the one, ethnic Russians on the one hand, and ethnic, you know, Balts. I mean, like in Lithuania, you would have this slightly, but in Belarus, it's not so. It's not a pressing issue actually. And anyhow, you would have a very, very deep dividing line between those who would be in favor of like a greater Russian vision for the region, and those who are opposed just out of a matter of principle and because of their like vision for Belarus. And like the most meaningful sign to express this actually became, as in Russia today, this Saint George stripes, or this, you know, I put it on ribbon, yeah. So I was really surprised that during the ice hockey championship, you would find many Belarusians, actually Belarusian citizens, who do not have to be Russian, ethnically Russians, but who would wear this as a sign of like solidarity, kind of solidarity, but as a political statement, and being highly aware of its political and historical connotation. So again, it's about a political choice being made today, but people are highly aware of the memory-based meaning of this, yeah, being both used or coming from the Great Patriotic War with Napoleon, but then being used by Stalin actually to after or in the course of World War II. And people are highly aware of this, and at the same time, the most surprising what happened last week was that Lukashenko did forbid state clerks and soldiers to wear this during the 9th of May parades, precisely because of this meaning, and precisely because he knows that this is a threat for him. Greater Russian politics in the region and the creation of a Ruski Mir are a threat to his realm as well. And to come really to an end, I wanted to say something about memory studies in the region more in general. So I can tell a bit more about the last decade, because I was somehow participating, but as I have learned from the previous presentations, it's basically 2 decades that we are used to speak about memory wars, and we go very deeply into certain narratives, and it looks a bit as if, and we, in my understanding, is that we are really used as, we are often from a historiographical background, and we are used to go into memory as something what we could learn from about the past actually. And I think, like, starting to think about what's going on in Ukraine, I reminded myself like of the very general point, and that's not my point, that of course there's a specific link between the past being projected in the presence onto the future being projected in the presence onto the past, yes, on something like on a canvas we call past. And I think that we have been very much stuck in our present time business, like especially in the 90s, and with all our societies like making its way into European Union and dealing with a lot of hard issues in economic terms and political terms, and there were a lot of processes actually going on. But what we can learn from Kiev actually is that there is an issue about the future. The future is still open and unclear, and we doing these choices to wear this ribbon or not to wear, to follow a certain line of argument today about Euromaidan or the legitimacy of Russian claims for Crimea or so on. What we usually call memory wars or memory, I would see rather as ammunition, as something we use as an argument in those debates. But in the end, there is something behind. I would call, like, this is a political choice. It's about the future, and this is precisely what happened in Belarus and Lithuania, that people were, it became clear to people's mind that this future is now opened actually by the Russian takeover of Crimea and the way how things developed during the last weeks even. And this is something we might have more in mind, also analyzing memory processes, not today, but in the last decades actually, how we address this, how we include the future into our memory studies. Thank you very much.